So, you want to know how the Linde gang could have prevented their complete destruction? Putting Micah in the coffin early or throwing him away was the best way. Let's see how we can do that, the events of Red Dead Redemption 2, specifically focusing on all the moments when Micah Bell showed his true colors long before Agent Milton finally revealed his betrayal. First, a necessary but quick recap. The gang is already bleeding members after the botched Blackwater Ferry Robbery. Dutch's plan, one Micah pushed him toward. Arthur and Hosea had been running a lucrative real estate scam, but Dutch went with Micah's ferry plan instead. During the heist, Dutch shot an innocent woman named Heidi McCourt in the head, seemingly due to Micah's encouragement, according to John Marston, who witnessed the killing. The gang fled into the mountains with multiple casualties, including Jenny Kirk and Davy Callender dead, Matt Callender captured, and John Marston wounded. Maybe you don't recall these early warning signs, and I can't blame you since the game does such a masterful job of making Micah seem like just another gang member at first. But Micah had only joined the Linde gang about 5 months before the events of the game, after supposedly saving Dutch's life during a bar fight over some stolen gold. At the very beginning of the story, early camp dialogue already hints at suspicion around Micah, and Dutch even notes the Blackwater job felt like a setup. Pay attention to the dialogues immediately after the opening cutscenes while discussing the botched robbery. Dutch notes that the Blackwater heist was a setup since the Pinkertons knew about it. The first major red flag should have been obvious to anyone paying attention. If you visit Micah's temporary camp near Strawberry, you can find a torn wanted poster for Dutch van der Linde, listing a bounty of $1,000 for his capture or death. It's unknown why Micah is carrying the wanted poster, but his mercenary nature and later betrayal suggest that Micah may well have intended to turn Dutch in and collect on the reward once the Blackwater money had been recovered. Arthur sees it happening. You can feel his frustration building throughout the story as Micah consistently encourages Dutch toward more violent and reckless decisions. Micah convinced Dutch to confront Cornwall and later to blow up Bacchus Bridge to distract the government. Micah convinces Dutch to ignore Arthur's plea to rescue Abigail after she is kidnapped. Why the gang overlooked Micah's behavior becomes clearer when you understand how manipulation actually works. Micah consistently approved of Dutch's decisions and had a vindictive attitude. He played into Dutch's need to feel like the smartest man in the room, constantly praising his plans and telling him what he wanted to hear. When Arthur or Hosea would question a decision, Micah would be right there backing Dutch up, making him feel validated and supported. The pattern was so obvious once you knew what to look for. Micah is described as a slimy opportunist who is wild, unpredictable, and somewhat of a nihilist. He frequently antagonized and bullied other gang members, sometimes going as far as making colorful threats to those he disliked, with Dutch being virtually the only person he didn't treat this way. Moments when Arthur could have ended it early were scattered throughout the entire story, but the biggest missed opportunity came right at the beginning. If Arthur just let Micah rot in the Strawberry jail cell, then the entire van der Linde gang may have been saved. When Dutch ordered Arthur to break Micah out of jail, Arthur could have simply refused or accidentally failed the mission. During the jailbreak in Strawberry, Micah needlessly shot up half the town in order to reclaim his prized revolvers. This bloodbath should have been the final straw, but instead Arthur helped him escape. Another perfect opportunity came after virtually every major job that went wrong. Arthur later notes in his journal that the heist may have been a setup, raising questions about how the Pinkertons knew of their plan. The Saint Denis Bank Robbery is another prime example. You can see Pinkerton agents before any shooting starts as you walk up to the bank. Micah is the only one not wearing black during the robbery, and some believe him wearing white was his way of having the Pinkertons not shoot at him. That's right, you all know the one. Dutch, Arthur, John, Micah, Bill, Javier, Lenny, Charles, Hosea, and Karen head into Saint Denis. In a chilling parallel to the ferry job in Blackwater, everything seems fine. They have the safe open and their hands on the cash. And then Pinkertons. Arthur could have gathered the other senior gang members after any of these disasters and demanded answers. Present Dutch with a united front and make it clear that Micah was becoming a liability. But Arthur's loyalty to Dutch worked against him here. The irony is that Micah's willingness to do anything, kill anyone, was exactly what made him so dangerous to the gang's survival. He had no moral compass, no lines he wouldn't cross, which made him useful in the short term but catastrophic in the long run. Looking back at the gang's deterioration, you can see how perfectly Micah orchestrated their downfall. With Hosea gone, Micah no longer had anyone to challenge his grip on Dutch. He manipulated Dutch by showering him in praises and making Dutch believe he's the only one on his side and that Arthur and John are snakes. With Hosea gone from the Saint Denis Bank Job, Dutch was left without his voice of reason. Arthur's faith in Dutch is shattered when he abandons Arthur to the army, leaves John for dead, and refuses to rescue a kidnapped Abigail. But by this point, it was far too late to save anyone except John. The mission where everything could have been different was when Arthur finally discovers the truth. Arthur and Sadie rescue Abigail from Milton, who names Micah as the Pinkertons' informer before Abigail kills him. During the operation to rescue Abigail, Arthur learns from Agent Milton that Micah had betrayed the gang and had been feeding the Pinkertons with information ever since his return from Gorma. This should have been the moment when Arthur marched straight back to camp, called everyone together, and exposed Micah in front of the entire gang. Instead, Arthur tries to handle it diplomatically, giving Micah multiple chances to come clean. Arthur returns to camp to confront Micah about it in front of the rest of the gang. A standoff occurs with Arthur and Micah drawing on each other. Arthur tries to convince Dutch that Micah is the traitor, while Micah tries to get Dutch on his side by denying it. But Arthur's fundamental misunderstanding of who he was dealing with cost him everything. Micah wasn't someone who could be reasoned with or redeemed. He was a cancer that needed to be cut out immediately and completely. Before anything else can happen, John suddenly returns, still wounded, claiming that Dutch and Micah left him to die, and he subsequently joins Arthur's side. Susan also joins Arthur's side and points a shotgun at Micah, but Micah kills her while she is distracted. The final confrontation shows just how thoroughly Micah had poisoned Dutch's mind. In the end, all of the remaining members of the gang, aside from John and Arthur, side with Micah. Even when Arthur is literally dying from tuberculosis, even when John is trying to make Dutch see reason, Dutch still can't bring himself to turn against Micah. But it didn't have to end that way. If Arthur had been willing to force the issue earlier, if he'd been willing to risk his relationship with Dutch to save the gang, Micah could have been stopped. A simple ultimatum delivered at the right moment with the right support from other gang members could have changed everything. According to Milton's words, Micah Bell, we picked him up when you boys came back from Caribbean, and he's been a good boy ever since. But many fans theorize that Micah was working against the gang much earlier than this, possibly from the very beginning. The most frustrating part is recognizing all the signs that were there from day one. Micah is constantly snorting, a sharp contrast to Arthur's worsening cough from tuberculosis, and his respiratory issues are a huge canary in the coal mine for Arthur's eventual TB diagnosis. Here's a fun little detail that Rockstar probably thought was hilarious. Despite being the most immoral member of the Van der Linde gang, Micah is almost never seen without a white hat on his head, which is traditionally associated with protagonists in classical westerns. Meanwhile, Arthur, our actual protagonist, wears a black hat. It's like the game is literally telling you this guy in the white hat is the real villain, and somehow we all missed it the first time through. Micah is considered to be perverse, wild, and unpredictable, even by the Van der Linde gang standards. He frequently made passes at the women in camp, including Susan Grimshaw, only evoking revulsion from them. He was cruel even by the gang's standards. Some fans even suspect him in Kane the dog's disappearance. He never went on guard duty and was almost never seen sleeping with the rest of the gang. The gang members who survived were the ones who never fully trusted Micah from the beginning. Charles, Sadie, and John all kept their distance and watched him with suspicion. They understood something that Arthur and Dutch couldn't accept, that sometimes people are exactly what they appear to be. Dutch's greatest failure wasn't his deteriorating mental state or his increasingly poor judgment. It was his inability to admit when he was wrong about someone. He brought Micah into the gang, welcomed him as family, and when that decision started destroying everything he'd built, his pride wouldn't let him correct the mistake. Arthur's greatest failure was trusting that Dutch would eventually do the right thing. He spent so much time hoping that Dutch would see through Micah's manipulation that he never took decisive action himself. Even in the gang's dying era at Beaver Hollow, Arthur rarely confronted Dutch, and even after the many displays of betrayal and disagreements, Arthur never decided to shoot him or just walk up and leave it all behind. The most tragic realization is how easy it would have been to stop Micah early on. He had very few real allies in the gang besides Dutch. Most other members either disliked him or kept their distance. Micah actively avoided going toe-to-toe with Arthur until the very end, and even then they were just evenly matched, which begs the question how that would have gone had Arthur not been nearly dead from tuberculosis. If Arthur had been willing to risk his standing with Dutch, if he'd been willing to force the confrontation that needed to happen, the entire tragedy could have been avoided. A united front from Arthur, John, Charles, and even Susan Grimshaw early in the story could have made Dutch choose between his loyal family and his newest manipulator. Instead, the Van der Linde gang tore itself apart from the inside, exactly as Micah planned. Micah, disloyal as they come, played both sides the entirety of the story, so that he could escape with the cash while any competition was occupied destroying each other. A brilliant but rather simplistic plan that worked only because both the Pinkertons and Dutch's gang were incapable of self-control and careful analysis. He didn't need to defeat them in a fair fight. He just needed to make them defeat themselves. And that's exactly what happened. After the collapse of the Van der Linde gang in 1899, former member Micah Bell established his own outlaw gang and went on to leave a trail of robberies and murders. As a result, Micah and his gang became feared all over the frontier, with one newspaper saying that Bell's acts of lawlessness rival that of von der Linde himself. The game doesn't just tell the story of outlaws in the dying days of the Old West. It tells the story of how good people can be manipulated and destroyed by someone who has no conscience, no loyalty, and no limits on what they're willing to do to get what they want. Eventually, John finds Micah and the two quickly end up in a shootout. Dutch exits the nearby cabin to reveal himself and aims his revolvers at Sadie and John. Dutch initially appears to be on Micah's side, but after an exchange of words, he shoots Micah in the chest, mortally wounding him. John delivers the killing shot to Micah. Even in death, Micah won. Soon after Micah Bell is killed, Bureau agents Edgar Ross and Archer Fordham show up on Mount Hagen, where they discover Micah's dead body. After a long manhunt for the culprit, they eventually trace Micah's murder back to John at Beecher's Hope, putting in motion the events of Red Dead Redemption. That's how easy it was to stop Micah Bell, and why nobody did it when it actually mattered. The signs were all there from the moment he joined the gang, but pride, loyalty, and misplaced trust allowed him to destroy everything the von der Linde gang had built over decades. Sometimes the greatest enemy isn't the one pointing a gun at you from across the street. Sometimes it's the one sitting around your campfire sharing your food, and slowly poisoning everything you care about with a smile on his face.